Racist passenger tries to have black man removed, freezes when he flashes his FBI badge. James Carter had barely taken his seat in first class when he felt it, an uneasy shift in the air. The weight of unwelcome stares, the hushed whispers just low enough to not be heard, but loud enough to be felt. Then a voice cut through the quiet hum of the cabin. "Excuse me. I don't feel safe sitting near him." The words carried an edge, sharp and entitled. A flight attendant hesitated, unsure how to respond. Other passengers turned their heads, sensing an unfolding spectacle. James slowly looked up, meeting the eyes of the woman who had spoken. Her face was tight with irritation, her hand gripping her armrest as if she expected to be in danger at any moment. The cabin grew silent. James had been in situations like this before. But this time, things were about to go very differently. If you stand for justice and believe more people should be aware of these injustices, make sure to like this video and subscribe. Let's make sure stories like this get heard. James Carter, a well-dressed black man in his mid-30s, adjusted his seatbelt and settled in for the long flight. He had flown first class many times before, but he could still feel the eyes of those who thought he didn't belong. He was used to it. But tonight things were different. He wasn't just any FBI agent, he was one of the best in his field. Born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, James grew up in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce, and people like him were often told they wouldn't make it. His mother, a schoolteacher, and his father, a former Marine-turned-mechanic, instilled in him the value of discipline, hard work, and integrity. From an early age, James was sharp. His mind worked in ways that set him apart, always questioning, always analyzing. He had a natural ability to read people, a skill that would later serve him well in law enforcement. Despite facing discrimination and systemic barriers at every turn, James excelled academically. He earned a scholarship to Howard University, where he studied criminal justice and psychology, determined to understand the roots of crime and the biases embedded in the system. After college, he joined the Atlanta Police Department, where he quickly made a name for himself as a dedicated and fearless officer. But it wasn't easy. He was often met with skepticism, from both criminals who underestimated him and fellow officers who didn't believe he belonged. He worked twice as hard, knowing he had to be better, sharper, and more disciplined than everyone else just to be seen as equal. His breakthrough came when he cracked a high-profile human trafficking ring that had eluded law enforcement for years. His meticulous investigative skills, combined with his ability to connect with victims and gain their trust, set him apart. The case caught the attention of the FBI, and soon after he was recruited into their ranks. As a special agent, James specialized in undercover operations, intelligence gathering, and counterterrorism. He worked on cases that took him across the country and beyond, dismantling criminal networks and exposing corruption. But with every success came new challenges. He often found himself in situations where he had to prove his worth, not just as an agent, but as a black man in a predominantly white institution. The weight of representation was heavy on his shoulders. He knew that every mistake he made would not just reflect on him, but on others who looked like him. But James never buckled under pressure. Instead, he used it as fuel, knowing that his presence in the bureau was changing perceptions, breaking barriers, and inspiring the next generation. Outside of work, James had few close friends. His job demanded secrecy and long hours, making relationships difficult. But he had a younger sister, Mia, who was his anchor. She was a lawyer fighting for social justice, and the two often had long debates about the flaws in the justice system. She challenged him, pushed him to see things from different perspectives, and reminded him that the fight for equality didn't just happen in courtrooms or on the streets, it happened in every interaction, in every moment, in everyday life. James carried that philosophy with him everywhere. He wasn't just an agent, he was a man who had fought for every inch of respect he had earned. And that fight wasn't over. So when he sat in that first-class seat and that woman pointed at him, assuming he didn't belong, it wasn't just an insult. It was a reminder. A reminder that no matter how much he achieved, there would always be people who saw only his skin and not the badge he wore. But James Carter had never let anyone define him. And he wasn't about to start now. The woman sitting 2 seats away, a middle-aged white woman with a pearl necklace and a sharp scowl, was glaring at him. Her lips curled in disgust, and James could already tell what was coming next. "Excuse me," she called out to the nearest flight attendant. Her voice was loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "I don't feel comfortable sitting near him." The flight attendant, a young woman in her 20s, hesitated. "I'm sorry, ma'am?" "Him." The woman pointed a manicured finger at James. "I don't know how he got into first class, but I'm sure he doesn't belong here. He needs to be removed." A few passengers turned their heads, sensing the brewing confrontation. Some shook their heads in embarrassment, while others leaned in eager for drama. James sighed and rubbed his temple. He had been through this before, but it never got easier. The flight attendant forced a polite smile. "Ma'am, this gentleman is a paying passenger just like everyone else. He has every right to be here." The woman huffed. "I want to speak to the captain. This is unacceptable. I'm not going to sit next to someone like him. I don't feel safe." James finally looked up, his brown eyes locking onto hers. "Safe from what exactly?" His voice was calm but firm. The woman stammered. I just don't feel comfortable. He looks suspicious." "Suspicious how?" James asked, tilting his head slightly. The flight attendant shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, I assure you this man has gone through all the same security checks as everyone else. He is not a threat." But the woman wasn't backing down. "Either he goes or I do." A few passengers murmured. One man in a business suit rolled his eyes. "For God's sake, lady, sit down and let us have a peaceful flight." She shot him a glare before turning back to the flight attendant. "Call security. I want him removed before we take off." That's when James slowly reached into his jacket pocket. The woman's eyes widened in fear as she assumed the worst. Her hand clutched her pearls as if they could protect her. Then James pulled out his FBI badge and flipped it open. The cabin went dead silent. The woman's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. You're FBI?" James gave a slow nod. "Special Agent James Carter. And I'm here on official business." Her face drained of all color. "Now, do you still want to report me, ma'am?" James asked, his voice as smooth as steel. The woman looked around, realizing she had made a terrible mistake. People were staring at her, shaking their heads. She swallowed hard and sank back into her seat, suddenly very interested in the in-flight magazine. The flight attendant, now more confident, straightened up. "Agent Carter, would you like anything to drink?" James smiled. "A black coffee would be great." The flight continued smoothly after that. But James knew that even with his badge, even with his title, he would always have to prove he belonged. And that was the real problem. As the flight leveled off at cruising altitude, James leaned back in his seat, but he could still feel the weight of the woman's gaze. She was clearly shaken, and though she was silent now, her body language screamed discomfort. Every few minutes, she would glance at him, only to quickly avert her eyes when she noticed he was watching. He had encountered people like her before. People who believed they could dictate where he belonged, who assumed they had the power to decide whether he was a threat or not. But this time, James wasn't just a man in first class, he was an FBI agent, and that made all the difference. The murmurs in the cabin eventually faded, and the flight attendants resumed their service, but James could tell that some passengers were still uneasy. The man sitting directly across from him, a middle-aged white businessman with graying hair, cleared his throat. "Agent Carter, is it?" James looked over. "That's right." The man nodded slowly. "I just wanted to say, that was something back there." James arched a brow. "Something?" "Yeah, I mean I've seen some crazy things on flights, but that was, well, you handled it well." James wasn't sure if it was meant as a compliment, but he simply nodded. "Thanks." The man hesitated. "I hate to say it, but I wasn't surprised. Seen this kind of thing before. People assume things." James sighed. "Yeah. Happens more than people think." The businessman shook his head. "It's a damn shame. You shouldn't have to prove yourself to anyone." James studied him for a moment before giving a small, knowing smile. "No, I shouldn't. But I do." The conversation ended there, and James turned his attention back to his coffee. But then he noticed the woman shifting in her seat again. Her face was still pale, and she seemed to be debating something internally. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she turned slightly toward him and cleared her throat. I didn't know you were an agent." James didn't look up from his cup. "Would it have mattered?" She hesitated. Well, I suppose." "Suppose what?" James finally met her eyes. "Would I have been less suspicious if I were wearing a suit instead of a hoodie? If I had gray hair instead of dreadlocks? Or would I have needed to flash my badge the moment I sat down just to put you at ease?" She looked flustered, her fingers twisting her pearl necklace. I didn't expect." James let her struggle with her words. He wasn't about to make this easy for her. After a long pause, she sighed. "I'm sorry." James studied her face. It wasn't the most heartfelt apology he'd ever received, but at least she had said it. He nodded once. "Good. Now maybe next time you'll think before you judge someone." She nodded quickly and turned away, clearly eager to put the conversation behind her. James let out a breath and looked out the window. The night sky stretched endlessly beyond the glass, peaceful and undisturbed. For the rest of the flight there were no more incidents. Just quiet understanding, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, someone had learned a lesson that night. By the time the flight was halfway through, the entire first-class cabin knew about the incident. Passengers who had filmed it were already posting the video online. Comments flooded in. "This is insane. The entitlement is unreal." The way she flinched when he reached for his badge faced with tears of joy. She tried to play the victim and got humbled real fast. Within hours, the video was trending under hashtag FBI Justice and hashtag entitlement fails on multiple platforms. Some passengers scrolled through their phones in real time, laughing at the reactions online. Meanwhile, the woman sat frozen in her seat, her fingers gripping the armrests. She had tried to avoid eye contact with everyone, but whispers followed her each time she moved. James, unfazed, continued reading his book, sipping his drink as if nothing had happened. As soon as the plane landed, James grabbed his carry-on and walked toward the exit. But as he stepped off the jet bridge, he was met with an unexpected sight. A massive crowd had gathered outside the gate. People held up their phones, cameras flashing. The video had gone so viral that the news had picked it up before they even landed. Reporters stood by, ready to cover the story. The moment James walked out, the crowd erupted into cheers. "FBI! FBI! Carter, you're a legend." James chuckled, shaking his head at the overwhelming reaction. He had no idea it would blow up like this. Then the crowd shifted, their cheers turning into loud boos. James turned to see what they were looking at. The woman. She walked out behind him, head ducked down, trying to escape the scene quickly. But the crowd wasn't letting her leave quietly. "Shame on you," someone yelled. "You got humbled real fast, didn't you?" another added. She tried to push past, her face burning with humiliation, but reporters surrounded her, shoving microphones in her face. "Ma'am, do you have any comment about the incident?" one asked. She muttered something under her breath and rushed away as fast as she could. Meanwhile, James gave a small nod to the crowd and continued walking. He had no interest in engaging further. Justice had already been served. James had faced situations like this his whole life. But this time the world got to see it play out in real time. Maybe, just maybe, it made some people think twice before judging someone based on the color of their skin. And as he left the airport, he knew one thing for sure. He would always stand his ground. If you believe in standing up for justice, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's make sure these stories continue to be heard. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know in the comments below.